welcome back to part 2 of our training. Before we get into the slideshows, we have another analyst here from our compensation. We're going to do some brief introductions again. So again, my name's Leah Rodriguez. I'm the compensation manager for the comp team. With me today is I have my 2 analysts, my lead and my senior, and I'm going to turn it over to them to introduce themselves. Wendy.
Hey everybody, my name's Wendy Moore. I am one of the lead compensation analysts over here that reports to Leah. I've been with the university for about 7 years now, in compensation for I think about 4, going on 4 years. I do have a slight little cold, so please excuse me if I'm coughing or sneezing throughout this. I will do my best to keep it to a minimum. Thank you.
Great. And again, I'm Anna Miller. I'm one of the senior analysts on the compensation team. I've been with U of A for about 2.5 years and doing compensation for about the same amount of time. Prior to that, I did government intelligence type of work. So similar type of data type of work, going through things. But yeah, so it's great to see you all again. And we will get started as soon as Leah does our introduction.
Sorry, I'm trying to get the slideshow set up and it's being rather difficult, so give me one moment. Today we're gonna be starting back. Hold on, sorry. I'm gonna see if this works. Please tell me if it looks weird. No. Okay, I don't know why the slideshow is doing that. Sorry. Well. I'm gonna share it as is for right now. And we are on the wrong slide. Okay, sorry. I don't know what's going on. Can someone else share it?
Anna, are you gonna go ahead and grab it?
Okay, thank you.
Does this look better? Can everyone see everything? It's a good size. Awesome.
Yeah, so last week we went over the broad basics of why we have compensation, and what the importance of having a sound compensation philosophy and how it dictates a lot of the things we do for position planning and employees within the university. So today we're going to get a little bit more into the application of that into things like positions, descriptions, job changes, new hire pay, and whatnot. I will be monitoring chat and kind of supplementing what Anna and Wendy present on. And with that, I am going to go ahead and hand it over to them to present on these topics.
Great. So welcome back everyone again. And we will start with kind of looking at the career architecture by its different elements. So as many of you all are aware, the career architecture was created about 5 years ago for the purpose of defining hierarchy and framework of jobs within our institution. It's designed to maintain competitive and equitable compensation across staff positions at the university as well. So some of the elements of the career architecture, we're going to start large and kind of work our way smaller. So starting off with one of the bigger grgroupings we have are the streams. And this is the progression that describes the nature of the work being performed. Here at the university, we have 3 different streams, our OCs, our PCs, and our Ms. So starting at the OCs, these are typically hourly positions and those that require more hands-on or technical craft type of work. These are going to be your research assistants, your plumbers, your administrative assistants, things like that. We next go to the professional contributors, and what kind of differs the professional contributors from the organizational contributors is that professional contributors typically require specialized knowledge or skills. They're overseeing the application of processes, policies, things like that. And most of you all probably fit into this category, this stream, as HR generalists. These also include things like research scientists, physicians, admin ops pros, things like that. And then finally, our third stream is the manager and leader category. So managers and leaders are going to be overseeing an area of responsibility. They'll also be directing multiple employees who work underneath them. They're managing the strategy and the policy development. And these are going to be like your academic affairs managers, your HR managers, your admin ops managers, things like that. So these are important to remember. And streams also connect with levels. So I have this graphic here that I kind of wanted to show for a couple different reasons. So we have our 3 streams here, our OCs, our PCs, and our Ms. And underneath each of these, we have different levels. So for the OCs, we have OC1 through OC4, PCs, PC1 through PC5. And for our managers, we have M1 through M5. And so as you can see on here, some of these do overlap. So we'll talk about a little bit later some of the work dimensions and some of the different things that go into each of these levels. But it's important to look at this career architecture not like a step ladder. Not every single job that we have in our architecture is going to have every single one of these levels. So for example, if we looked at facilities management, a lot of their jobs are more on the OC side of things. They're a lot of that hands-on, that technical, that craft type of work. And really, they don't have a lot of professional contributors within that function. Their jobs are typically either hands-on or they're at the manager leader level. So when you look at those jobs within JD Expert, you're not going to see all of these levels for each one of the jobs within facilities management and others across the architecture as well. So it's important to know that even though we have all of these available, market and then what the university needs are what dictate whether or not we have each of these levels within the different functions and families throughout our career architecture. Great. And also important to note the architecture is informed by market data. Like I had said, the market and the university needs are considered when we decide on which levels are appropriate. And like I said, some of these levels do overlap when it comes to the scope of work. So by not looking at it as a ladder and more so of what the business need is, you sometimes will see that maybe a PC1 and an OC4 have similar kind of scopes of work when it comes to what they're responsible for. And it's not always going to be to where it's a natural linear progression to where it goes, you start as an OC1 and work your way up to the 4 and then you move to the PCs. It's going to be if there is a business need and a market placement for the different levels within underneath the different streams. So the next thing we're going to look at, and I know you all are already familiar with a lot of this terminology, but I just want to go over it in case there is anyone that doesn't understand some of these basic foundations of our career architecture. We have what we classify our job into functions and families. So when you look at a function is a group of jobs involving similar types of work, training, skills, knowledge, expertise. So these are going to be your overall categories. So IT, HR, finance, all of these have different functions within our career architecture. However, we break those functions down a little bit smaller into families, which are subsets of a job function that's usually more specialized in nature, but it still relates to that overall function. So for example, I have here, I took a snippet from JD Expert to kind of show this in action. Up here on this top bar where it says human resources, information technology, instructional and assessment services, these are examples of your functions. And within each of these functions, we have these separate families. So I'm clicked on, for the screen grab, I have human resources selected, and we're looking at this benefits family. So the function is human resources. Underneath the umbrella of human resources, we have benefits as the family. And then we have all these different levels. And like we had just talked about, some of these are skipped. There's no need right now for a benefits analyst 4 or an M3. And again, this goes back to what's out in the market, what is common for these jobs, as well as what the university needs within our architecture.
I would also add that sometimes we have subfamilies within families. So you might have multiple in JD Expert families listed under one. You'll probably see that in some instances. So I just wanted to also state that.
Thanks, Leah. All right. This is something that I could really talk about for days. The work dimensions are so important to our career architecture. And what these are the OCs, the PCs, and the Ms, they all have defined work dimensions that help define a job progression towards more job complexity, knowledge, and responsibilities. So within JD Expert, I'm sure you all are familiar with the principal responsibilities for the family, as well as the principal responsibilities for the job. And these are different. So these are aligned more with the job level. So for example, all OC ones will have the same expectation when it comes to leadership and influence, complexity of work, et cetera. Whereas M1s, M2s are going to also have their own differing work dimensions. And as those levels increase, so do what the responsibilities are and what we expect for that level to be able to perform. So these are a list of the different work dimensions that we have within our architecture. And these are also all in JD Expert as well, and should be looked at every single time we're mapping a position, when we're looking at doing a promotion, to kind of see what is the overall expectation for somebody at this level. So looking at leadership and influence, that's going to be the scope of management responsibilities and impact with respect to strategy, operations, and people. So at the lower levels, some of the lower level OCs and the lower levels PCs, you're going to see not very much leadership and influence, whereas that's going to increase as the levels get higher, up into the higher level Ms and the higher level PCs as well. Complexity, this is going to be the difficulty of tasks, projects, and problems encountered. As roles advance through the architecture, more advanced problem solving and decision making is going to be required for that position. Communication, this is your interaction with stakeholders, others on campus, outside of campus, the complexity of information that is expected to be able to be communicated. And moving on, we have our latitude, which is that degree of autonomy and decision-making authority. So it's really asking, when this person makes a decision, what is the impact going to be? Is it going to impact their immediate group? Is it going to impact their entire college? Is it going to impact the whole university? So we want to look at how much the decision-making latitude relates to the job. And then finally, I've kind of lumped these together, our knowledge, education, and experience. So this is what is required of the job to perform the role effectively. So obviously, higher levels are going to require more advanced education, specialized knowledge, extensive experience, things like that. So these are really important, and they are outlined not only on our website, but also within JD Expert. So those are always available for you to review and to look at what is required for each of the different levels. Additionally, we are working on some handouts as well to kind of give you guys a look at, from an OC1 all the way up to an M5, what is an example of like what would be expected for each of those different levels if we did have within a function or a family every single level available. So those will be available pretty soon on our website, and it's going to give it like kind of just very basic examples like how to tie a knot, how to make coffee, things like that kind of help you to visualize what would be expected for somebody in that industry at each of the different levels we have in our career architecture. So more to come on that, and that will be hopefully helpful for you all when it comes to these work dimensions. Pay grades, another important part of our career architecture. So I have a snippet here of just several of our pay grades. Our pay grades range from pay grade 2 all the way up to 20. And I just kind of wanted to take a snippet out of here so we could talk about some of the elements of the pay grades. So every pay grade is going to have a minimum, a midpoint, and a maximum. And so let's look at pay grade 2. The minimum for that is the 31,200, and it goes all the way up to the maximum of 46,800. You will see that pay grade 2 and pay grade 3 do overlap. So while the maximum of pay grade 2 is that 46,800, the beginning point is at 34,320 for the minimum of the pay grade 3. So the grades do overlap, and jobs within the same grade are usually comparable when it comes to qualifications, scope, responsibilities, and complexity of work. So how these pay grades are determined goes back to what Leah was talking about when she talked about our compensation cycle, our cyclical cycle that we do every single year. So every year, compensation does an external market review. And in context of compensation, market really means that demand and that worth of jobs within the current labor market. So we're looking at the cost of labor. And once the compensation team goes through all of that data and sorts it all, we typically make recommendations to senior leadership when it comes to recommendations for changing pay grades for specific jobs. And leadership makes that final approval based on university strategy and goals when it comes to particular jobs, if they want to increase the pay grades for certain jobs within our architecture. And like I said, not every market review results in upgrades to this assigned pay grades. If university leadership determines that the market data review reveals a need to update that compensation for certain jobs, then those jobs may be moved to different pay grades within the existing pay structure. Something else you may have seen as of recently with the increase in minimum wage and how we kind of got ahead of that curve here at U of A and increased last year our minimum wage to $15 an hour ahead of the Tucson requirement for 2025. You did see that pay grade structure shift a little bit because we needed to bring that pay grade 2 up to that $15 an hour. And so that's a type of situation where you may see these pay grade numbers change. But this is reviewed consistently by our team and kept up to date. All right, moving on to PCN. So I know you all are very familiar with doing these for your groups. I've heard from different groups that there are different ways that these happen. Sometimes people, I've heard out in the units like a manager will come to the HR representative within the unit and be like, hey, I need an admin ops pro 2. And they don't really have a lot written down. They don't really know exactly what the duties and responsibilities are. And the HR person kind of takes that lead on writing out these duties and responsibilities. In other cases, managers or hiring managers will sometimes provide their local HR support with a PD already filled out. And so I'm going to talk about that today as if you all have already gotten the PD filled out and what you're going to need to be looking for to ensure that it's ready to be sent to compensation. And that it hits all of the points that we need in order to get that approved for the hiring manager. So to take a step back, position descriptions are really essential for a couple different things. Some of the more obvious ones are for hiring, obviously, placement within the architecture, defining those job duties, minimum qualifications, things like that. It's also necessary for complying with laws. We look at FLSA within the PD. We look at those duties and responsibilities to see if they hit that duties test, the salary basis test, the salary level test. It's also a good place where we can talk about like any ADA restrictions or things that are going to be required for the job that are outside of normal working conditions, like if they're going to be exposed to extreme cold or heat, things like that. So those are pretty obvious as to why the PD would be required. But some of the less obvious things for the position description that can be used later on within the employment life cycle is we can use those for training and coaching, writing performance standards and evaluating performance, career planning and management, as well as succession planning. So keeping those up to date and accurate as to what the person is doing is really important. And that's why we take these really seriously. And we sometimes push back on some of the information that we receive because we want these to be as useful as possible for the employee, for the supervisor, for the organization as a whole. All right. So one of the first things, like when you get a PD that you need to kind of discuss with the manager is what are the talent needs? What is it that they want out of this position. What kind of person do they need? What levels of responsibility are they going to be required? We have a whole list of questions and some brainstorming kind of ideas for you all that will be included whenever we share these slides with you later on. But just for today, some of the questions that I may ask of a hiring manager, if I want to kind of learn more about the role or try to figure out where this should fall within the architecture, what level it should be aligned with, are what are those key stakeholders and internal and external partners that this role is interacting with? What are the essential skills, qualifications, and experience required to perform this role effectively? How much autonomy will there be in the role? And these questions help you answer some of those work dimensions that we talked about earlier when it comes to figuring out what level is appropriate for the role. The next thing you're going to want to be doing is evaluating that career stream and level. Is this going to be an OC? Is this going to be a PC? Is it going to be a manager level position? And you can use those work dimensions to identify which level is most appropriate. So if the manager asked for a PC 2, but they want this person to be supervising 5 people and overseeing the strategy of a small department, it's like maybe the PC isn't the best way to go about this, and maybe PC2 is a little bit too low of a level for this position. And we can identify that, like I said, with the work dimensions that are available both in JD Expert and our website. Additionally, you're going to want to determine that job function and family. Sometimes a leader may come to you and say, I want an IT, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a job and I'm blanking. I want an administrative operations manager 3. But when we look at it, it's like they're not really touching the budget. They're doing more of like HR type of work. So maybe we want to look into a different family and a different function and to try to determine what it is that's going to be most appropriate for that job. So it's important for you all to be able to look at a PD and to be able to just like on the surface level, see like, is this appropriate to fall within that function and family? Sometimes we get PDs, it's like very hands-on, like technical type of jobs, but then they throw them just in project manager. And that's not really the best fit within our architecture. So we sometimes will ask that the HR professional and the hiring manager go back and look at other options for the job based on where it should fall on the work dimensions and within the function and family for the duties and responsibilities. And then finally, what you're going to want to do before you submit this to us in compensation is just to ensure that the position description is aligned to what's in the JD Expert job profile. So we're in the process of updating JD Expert. We are going through and making sure that there are principal responsibilities for the job for every job in our architecture. This has been a long-going project and we're nearing completion on it. So you will be seeing things change in JD Expert. And it won't be huge drastic changes from what you're used to, but it's really going to outline and detail some of those principal responsibilities for the job to help this job matching process go more smoothly, to not have so much back and forth when it comes to what's being submitted by comp and what you reviewed and how you see the job within your smaller organization, within your unit and college department. So with that,
Before we go further into it, real quick, I want you guys to be able to feel empowered to do this type of like review and checkpoint of where you can get. We are here as your comp analyst to support you in that. So if you're struggling at all with any of these reviews or figuring out where it might fall in the career architecture, please reach out to us. We're happy to support you in that and give you guidance to kind of get what the hiring manager really truly needs too. So we don't expect you to be comp analysts, so use us when you are not so sure.
all right. And so now I'm going to pass this over to Wendy, who's going to talk a little bit more about managing within the pay grades.
Thank you, Anna. Earlier, Anna reviewed how our pay grades are determined by the market, and we use these pay grades to help place employees appropriately in the pay ranges. My next couple slides, I'm going to discuss how we can help departments manage within the pay grades for new hires, promotions, incumbent reviews, and other salary adjustments. So as you can see, with this model that we have here, this provides a framework for administrating equitable and appropriate salaries. And we should be able to use this as a reference when making compensation decisions. So up here at the top in the red, you'll see that there's 4 quartiles, and these quartiles align with our minimum, midpoint, and maximum of our pay grades. And we use these quartiles to help assess where an employee or candidate should be placed in the pay range based off of their education, experience for the position that they're in. So for the first quartile, most candidates are new to the job industry. They're normally paid towards the minimum of the pay grade. These candidates just meet the qualifications for the job, and then they're building skills to perform in their position. The second and third quartile, these employees have been in the industry just a little bit longer. They should have more experience than the minimum qualifications of the position, and they're normally paid closer to the midpoint or at the midpoint of the pay grade. They're more seasoned. They should be able to take on more independent work and have a broad knowledge of their jobs, have a broader knowledge of their jobs. And then the last quartile is the fourth quartile. And this is kind of, we don't have a lot of people in the fourth quartile or at the maximum of the quartile because these are very seasoned candidates. They usually have 30 to 40 years plus of experience. They're experts in their field, and they demonstrate the highest levels of contribution. And also with that fourth quartile, I just want to note that we don't pay anybody here over the max. Like, we would never start an employee above the max of the pay grade. We do have a few people who we call red circled and who have been kind of grandfathered into that position. So this framework comes into play when we're assessing new hires, promotions, incumbent reviews, and just the other salary increases. So I'm going to go a little more depth into those types of situations. Anna, you can go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay, so for new hire pay, it's important to establish an appropriate pay for new hires that reflects the employee's relevant skills, knowledge, expertise, and experience. We also need to consider other factors like the internal equity, candidate guidelines, budget constraints, and compensation factors. So for internal equity, we always want to ensure that we're paying the new hire as a fair rate relative to other employees in similar roles. And this could be at the department level, the division level, or at the university as a whole. And we always want to make sure that we're reviewing the candidate to make sure that they align with their qualifications. So that's where the managing within pay range really comes into play. We always want to take into consideration budget constraints and financial resources. Not all departments have the same financial resources. Some have bigger budgets than others. So just because your department has the budget to pay above the midpoint doesn't mean they should, or they shouldn't pay more just because they have the money. And we also want to remember other compensation factors like the benefits and perks that come along with taking a job at the university. This slide, and when you get this slide deck, that compensation factors is a link, and it does go to our total rewards page or total rewards calculator, and it'll give the department and an employee a better idea of everything that comes within their full hiring package. Also want to note here that any offers below the midpoint, the department does have the ability to extend the offers without compensation approval. And on the other side, I just want to note too that if the department is requesting a salary above the midpoint, this will require a more thorough review from compensation. We always make sure that we do get the HR senior partner involved, and we do need a detailed justification for why this candidate would be the best fit for the position to be paid above the midpoint. Also want to note in there that any above the midpoint requests do need to follow the talent process. So those need to be submitted into talent with the appropriate justifications attached. Did anybody have any questions on new hires? Or making an offer? Okay. So I'm going to move on to promotions and incumbent reviews. So promotions occur when a current university employee is moved to a position in a higher pay grade. And this can be handled in two ways. This can be competitively posted for internal and external candidates to apply, or it can be handled as an incumbent review. An incumbent review is normally dictated when an employee's job changes 30% or more. And considerations that we need to look at, is there a business need? And I know Anna had covered that a little bit in her presentation. Like, does the department really need this level, or are they doing it for other reasons like retention or merit? We also wanted to look at the compensation guidelines. When we look at promotions and incumbent reviews, it does go hand in hand with the recruitment guidelines. Their guidelines influence when it is not appropriate to handle either an incumbent review or a promotion. And so I'm going to go over those guidelines really quickly for an incumbent review. We want to make sure that it is the next available level in the career architecture. As Anna had mentioned, not every level is in our architecture. So if there is a level missing, it would be considered the next level if it's not there. We want to make sure that they're not getting an incumbent review more than once in a calendar year. We want to make sure that they're still within their unit, assigned unit, and they're staying within the same job function. We also make sure that the employee has been within their position for 6 months and that they were hired competitively. If all of those guidelines are met, then you can submit an MSF exception transaction for an incumbent review. If for some reason we are not able to meet all of those guidelines, we would have to reach out to the recruitment team for either an exception or for help posting the position. A couple of things that aren't on here for incumbent reviews. We do have demotions, we have lateral moves, and we have mapping corrections that would also fall under an incumbent review. Those ones do require a little more of a thorough evaluation. So we do ask that you do get your partners involved on those and bring us in at the beginning. And we can help guide on what the department is truly trying to do. Did anybody have any questions on the promotions?
Yes, there's one in the chat, Wendy. What would be the guidelines for an incumbent review in a parallel position? Oh,
So that would be
they did
more,
that.
it's like a transfer, is that, or a lateral move?
Yeah, it sounds like if they're in the same function, let's say they're a PC2 moving to another family in a PC2.
Yes, so the guidelines for those, they're pretty similar. We have to make sure, well, for any position, we always make sure that they meet the minimum qualifications of the position. So if you're going from a PC2, more than likely you're going to meet those qualifications. You want to make sure it is within the same unit. I don't have my guidelines with me. I think there's one other. And then for our increases, for lateral moves, we do recommend no more than a 5% increase. For other promotions, like for like a promotion, it is a 5 to 15%. Does that answer the question?
I think
It
so. I
can
think the
be
only
done.
think the only exception to the 5% for a lateral is if the PC2 in the new family was a higher pay grade. So if you're a PC2 in one family at a pay grade 8 and you're going to a PC2 in another family at a pay grade 9 and you're not at the minimum of the pay grade 9, you might see a higher increase. So that's the only time where maybe there might be more, we would maybe recommend a higher percentage of above the 5%. We did get another question, so I'm going to ask you, Wendy.
Yeah.
How do we know when to do a competitive recruitment for promotions?
Yeah, so those are kind of those guidelines that I went over. So we want to make sure it is the next level in the career architecture. We want to make sure that they haven't had a incumbent review within the year rolling calendar. It's within the same unit, that it falls within the same job function, and they've been there for 6 months and they were competitively hired. If they fall outside of any of those guidelines, we would recommend a competitive recruitment. Does that answer? Oh, I think Jessica.
Yeah, so I would just like to reiterate, like our guidelines reflect what is in recruitment, and when we do our analysis for IRs or anything of that nature that would fall into the MSS exception, we make sure that it's going to comply with recruitment guidelines. If for some reason it doesn't meet recruitment guidelines, then we would tell you that it needs to be a requisition.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. I think Jessica is posting our guidelines and maybe the recruitment guidelines as well. So thank you for that, Jessica. So the other types of increases that we have are in pay range adjustments. So there are a few, these are kind of split up into a couple different ways in our guidelines. Some of the ones that are really handled by compensation are wage compression, market adjustments, and equity. These are normally bigger conversations that we should be brought in at the beginning with the HR senior partner, and will help assess what the department's trying to do with these wage compressions markets, because these are controlled by compensation. If we see a code come through for equity or market, we always go straight back to the department or the senior partner and ask, okay, what are we trying to do here? Outside of those that are controlled by compensation, we do have additional duties. And additional duties is a change which is really less than 30%. They don't push you over into the incumbent review. And these can be duties which employees taking on higher level tasks, maybe learning a new program. They can be permanent, they can be temporary, and we normally recommend up to 10% for these additional duties. I did have lateral moves in here, and we kind of talked about those under the incumbent review, but these can be done through ways, as Leah had mentioned, through a promotion. If an employee applies to a different department, we don't normally see those. If they do come to you and an employee's trying to, if like, let's say 2 departments are fighting for an employee, we always recommend, hey, we're going to do a 5%. So there's not like a bidding war or counter offers going back and forth. Let's see. And then the last, we also have, off-cycle merit. So any off-cycle merit is outside of SIP that a department would want to provide an employee for basically performance that they're exceeding expectations in their job and reward them for it. We normally recommend up to 10%. And it is best practice for an employee to only receive a 10% within a rolling calendar year. When we receive these, compensation does check to make sure that that employee hasn't received multiple. if we notice that they have received multiple increases, we will reach out to the department to the senior partner to find out what's going on with this employee. One of the things that isn't mentioned on here is retention. And retention is normally an offer from internal or external job. We do require some sort of offer letter, and we do review to make sure it is the like for like position. If let's say we have an employee who's working as a PC2, but they apply for a manager position and they want their department to match that, we wouldn't be able to match that type of situation, but we can look at other ways to offer some kind of increase, maybe through merit or some form of slight of increase. It's also, these transactions also normally come through as a job change. We don't require a justification for job changes, but we do have a salary increase form that we highly recommend. And that form helps the department write reasonings for why they're making these decisions. And it helps them look at internal equity, other employees that maybe could be also in line for maybe a promotion, some kind of increase. At the bottom of that form, there is a place for the partner to sign off on. If we receive a transaction and we don't have the form or a signature on that form, we will reach out to the partner just to make sure that they are aware that the department is submitting this.
I also want to note that, like, when we go back to retention, I would just to make a note, compensation is not the only way in which we can advocate for retention for an employee. There are different ways to look at the total rewards package, flex work. We do have such a robust career architecture, so maybe we have their job is expanded, and maybe we need to look at an IR for them. You know, there's lots of things that we can talk about outside of just strictly giving them an increase if they have an external offer. So I wanted to just point that out for you guys to be aware that we shouldn't just jump straight to pay, that there's other ways to look at retaining employees. Also, Wendy, we have a few questions, so I'm going to give them to you. Anna, you kind of touched on this, but I wanted to pose it live. If we have if they want to offer a temporary increase, can they do that?
Yes, for additional duties. Yes, so on the salary increase form as well, it does have an option to check temporary or permanent.
And then for the 10% per rolling year, does that exclude SIP when applicable?
Yes, so we do not include SIP in that 10% off-cycle merit.
And I would say we do look at, though, if they were provided merit at SAP, how much merit they were provided if you are requesting merit. So I would say we take it with a grain of salt. So if you're giving merit at SAP and then 2 months later you're giving more merit, we might be like, why wasn't that included at the time of SIP? Like, why is this person needing consistent merit increases? So yes, we don't really take SIP into consideration, but I don't want to say we totally ignore it either. But the general adjustment, we don't really apply that for the 10% rolling year.
Thank you.
And then are there guidelines for promotions from PC level to M level?
So we would have to look at what exactly the department's trying to do. If it's like a PC2 trying to go into an M1, M2, and there are jobs in the career architecture, we would probably recommend a promotion for a situation like that, but it depends on the situation too.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, Anna, I don't know why those are there. Okay, so and this is just a little graphic that shows, why all of this really matters. It gives you some of the average costs and the time that it takes to train up our employees, to get them to where they need to be. So it just kind of shows like we want to make sure we have all the right information. We have the right job, we're placing them in the right market value, and we're using their correct or their right skill set. I don't know, Leah, did you want to add anything to this?
Yeah, it costs to hire. And so we want to make sure we have the right position. We want to make sure we're getting the right talent. We want to make sure that they know the expectation of the job so we're not losing them 6 months down the road. It is a high cost to bring on someone into an organization. It's less of a cost to retain employees. So when we go to post or create a position, we want to do our best to have it as close to perfect as possible. And it matters because there's a budget bottom line that impacts for that cost to hire. So we want to get a return on our investment into hiring someone into our organization. So just to put it into perspective of why this matters.
Thank you.
So that was the broad overview of those, the different applications of creating PCNs, job changes, IRs, and promotions. I do see that there's a question in here that I kind of wanted to bring up. Carol, you started it and Richard, you added. So I'm going to open it up to you guys because I wanted to give you a chance to pose it so I understanding the question a little bit better.
Hi, this is Carol. Like lots of times when we're creating new PCNs and we're helping the managers, or they've already created the PCN and then brought it to us to try to done the description form and brought it to us so we could actually request for a new PCN. It's not until we get in there to request the PCN that those risk management questions are asked. So I'm just wondering if there's a reason why it's not put on the position description form so that those types of questions can be answered up front. So it's not to the point to where we get in there to actually request it to where we're then, oh, we need to go back and find this information out. That was really the point of the question.
Yeah, we revised our PD form a while back ago because which had a little bit more of the questions for the work dimensions and some of this because from feedback that the form was too long. However, I will say that when we add a job into the architecture, we assess market for what type of risk these jobs have. We also have a workers' comp code that is vetted through risk management that is applied to the job. There's a lot of things that go into putting a job into our architecture, and it considers those duties and the risk that they might need for those particular duties. So I think some of that work is already kind of done innately when you're choosing a job within the career architecture. If it's something beyond what we would normally consider as risk for that particular job within the architecture, I would recommend indicating that in our additional information section that we provide in the PD. If there's a concern that we're not capturing it appropriately within the architecture, that's when I would want our team to be looped in to see if we don't have the appropriate classification within the architecture for the role. I guess, Andrea?
So I guess my question then is, when we go in to request the new PCN, how do we answer those questions? Or do we need to be answering those questions?
I go ahead, Anna.
I was just going to say, Leah, I think she's talking about, Carol, and correct me if I'm wrong. Whenever you go in to actually initiate the transaction, it's those questions like, will you be working with unsupervised minor?
Yes,
Things
yes,
like
all
that.
those risk management
Yeah, those
questions.
risk
Are you gonna
management
be
ones that
working
are
with
in the
bloodborne?
transaction.
Yeah, in the actual transaction form. So it asks you all those when you're submitting, it asks you all those questions and you have to respond either yes or no before you can submit.
Yeah, I don't know. I would recommend just we can provide a list of questions. We're going to, and we can include those ones that you should go through prior to submitting a PD. But
If you have
I
recommendations for anything like that, Carol, please let us know, because a lot of times us from the comp side, we see things from the back end. We don't always see like what you all are seeing when it comes to initiating those transactions, as we don't work on that side of the system very often. So sometimes people will bring up things like this and we're like, wow, we've never really considered that. So that could just be something that we talk about as a team to see if it's worth putting onto our position description form to aid you all in answering those questions ahead of time.
Okay, that's great. I can just send you an email and show you what I'm talking about,
Yeah,
and then
of
maybe you
course.
can let me know. Okay, thank
Sure
you.
thing. Thank you, Carol.
And now I just want to open it up to anyone who might have any additional questions or anything clarifying that we presented on today. Yeah. Okay. Because it looks like we answered all the Q&A questions and the ones that came through chat. So if no one has any questions, I will give you some, 9 minutes back to your hour and your day, and we will see you next week in our training where we'll get to go over case specifics. We did get one question come in. Do you have a breakout of years of experience as they apply to the different quartiles? Anna, Wendy, either of you want to try and answer that one?
I mean, we have a formula that we use on some of our resources, like specifically, I guess we don't have a breakout per se. We have tools like the comp calculator that we really haven't covered, but we will introduce that at a later time. And then I guess we have tools that help us determine that, and then we break it down in some of our calculators that we utilize as well.
Yeah, and I would say that it is just a guideline. It's not again, comp is art and science, so it's a broad approach to what we would think to get to midpoint, where how many years of experience in that role at that level, where we would expect you to be at years of experience by midpoint. So it's not a hard set rule. So, and it was asked, will you guys have the opportunity to have access to the comp calculator? I imagine some of you will down the road, but right at this time, we need to get you through the training first, and then we'll go forward on who needs access.
To add on to that, Jerry, so I want to give an example to kind of walk through what I'm trying to say. Let's say that your department decided that you need a research assistant 1. You need a very low level person. You need somebody to just kind of keep track of calculations and results and just put those in a spreadsheet, collect basic samples, things like that. But you find a candidate that has 30 years of research assistance type of experience, and you're like, wow, they would be really great for this position. They would require no training. You have to kind of go back and ask some of those questions, is like, is the OC1 really an appropriate level to start that we need? Or do we need this more advanced person? Would this aid our work better? Would this be able to get the results that we need? Maybe we need to go back to the drawing board and request a higher level OC or even a PC for this type of person. So sometimes when we see people who are like, we want to pay at the max because this person has 30 years of experience, it's like, does your department really need that 30 years experience to fill this job that only requires no experience, or a year of experience, 3 years of experience, et cetera? Does that make sense? There's other factors that you need to consider instead of just years of experience. So that's why I don't think that it would necessarily be useful to have a tool that just calculated out just black and white, like if you hit this, you should be here. If you hit this, you should be there, because there are different factors that go into that art and science that Leah talked about.
Thank you, Anna.
You're welcome.
Well, thank you all for your time today. I hope you found this valuable. And we will see you next week.